All right, so we are going to get right into what our Bible study is. For those of you who are new, we are in the book of Ecclesiastes. Last week, we started with our introduction, a little background, and we got through chapter 1, the first 11 verses. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, we do have it available online, so feel free to download it or go look at it or look at the notes, whatever it might take for you. So the book of Ecclesiastes is Solomon's theory on the meaning of life. The thesis is the meaning of life can't be found in the creation. Therefore, it is vanity to try to find its meaning there. Right? Those two sentences might sound nice and tidy and summed up, and they are, and I took a long time to get there. Because talking about what a theory is and what a thesis is, that's all a whole study on its own, okay? In the theory world, once something or a theory is proposed, then it must be substantiated, okay? So what has Solomon used to substantiate his theory so far? The observable cycles in nature that give no meaning to life. Right? The biorhythm, the solar, the weather, the water, the accumulation of knowledge, all of those things that are cyclical. And by accumulation of knowledge, I'm talking about what one generation knows doesn't necessarily get shared with the next generation. So in that way, it's cyclical. Right? I am sure there are lessons that my mom learned in her life that instead of me learning because she learned it, I had to go and learn it myself all over again. Okay, so that's the cycle even in knowledge, okay? Let's see. So everyone can observe these things. We've talked about that. From a scientific measurement, the words, if you were a scientist and you're trying to put out your theory and you're looking at substantiating it, the things that you would describe would be something that is reliable and sustainable and repeatable. So all of those things that Solomon gave us in the beginning of chapter 1 meet those criteria. Each one of those is met by the examples that he put forward. Secondly, Solomon continues to substantiate his theory now. All right, so we have the beginning, and now we're going to move to the next thing that he's going to use to substantiate his theory or theme of this book. Okay, so we're going to go to Ecclesiastes. We're going to be in chapter 1, and I'll be reading verses 12 through 18. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize that this also is striving after wind, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Wow, there's a lot there, and we're going to unpack it. All right, so we're going to go back and start in verse 12. The author continues by restating who he is, how. How does he describe himself? He says, I, the preacher, he starts with that, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. From last week, do you remember the translation of the word preacher? Yeah. One who gathers, one who convenes, one who assembles a group. So that's where we got that translation into preacher. He repeats here what? His resume includes what? He's king over Israel in Jerusalem. Okay? Just as a side note, this does not mean he was once king over Israel and is now not king over Israel. because that's what some of those who get into word play want to interpret this to mean. Oh, this person's speaking about having been king only in the past, so he's not king now. There's nothing in the context that would give us that at all. It's just the person writing wants you to understand why he has the ability to tell you he's had experiences, right? So when someone's sharing important information, they should always give the authority by which they have to share that information. This is sadly lacking in our culture right now, okay? We have all kinds of people giving us all kinds of advice on things like science, right? When they have absolutely no background to be giving any such information. There's people that are giving us information about political science, and they have no idea, right? It's just their opinion, and they have nothing to base it on in terms of any kind of knowledge or wisdom. All kinds of people, all kinds of things. We could just talk about that forever. But there's a whole lot of what we call Monday morning quarterbacking going on, right? They can look back and tell you all the things they would have done different. Well, they weren't in that moment at that time. All right, so we need to understand one of the reasons that this has been included and that this author has referenced it twice is to say, I've been in a position to know these things. I come with a little bit of background and experience in this area. So the point is when someone's going to put forth their position on something, they should have the experience to speak from or to share from. The author wants to establish he's been king in Jerusalem, and he had shared that at the beginning of verse 1 of this chapter. It is noteworthy that Solomon used the same language in the writings of Proverbs. So if you looked back at the beginning of Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1, he says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. So it would be another reason I would say very clearly Solomon's talking about himself and declaring himself to be the one that's giving us this information. Back in Ecclesiastes now, verse 13. What does Solomon say he did? All right. So Solomon establishes his intent to seek and explore was by what faculty? By his wisdom. He sets it right up front for us. It's by his wisdom that I'm going to be doing this. How does one seek and explore? For yourself, how do you seek and explore something? You experience it yourself, right? You go after it yourself. You pick up the book and you read it. If you say, I'm going to seek and explore about something, you go do the research on it. You don't seek and explore by asking your kids to go do it, right? You do it, all right? In verse 13, what did he wish to explore? Concerning all that's been done under heaven. This is similar to the phrase that was used back in verse 3, the under heaven. In verse 3, it was established the events Solomon would be referring to were on the earth versus in heaven, and we talked about that being temporal versus eternal. Also in verse 13, how does Solomon describe this project? It's bothersome. Mine says it's a grievous task, right? Which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. None of that sounds nice and warm and fuzzy, does it? Right? Very analytical and from a pessimistic viewpoint. So when in verse 13 it says, it is a grievous task, what is it referring to? The seeking and exploring. All that has been done under heaven. So this process is described as a grievous task. It is a dark and solemn duty, not filled with joy. He's setting that out right there for us to see. And he even says, where does this task come from? God. Okay? The word for God used here is the word Elohim, not Yahweh. That name of God is often used when referring to his power or his justice or his judgment. It was also the thought of God universally considered by all men not just referring to him as the God of Israel or the covenant God of Israel. That's when they would use the term Yahweh. So he's not just trying to figure out who God is and everything under the sun in relationship to Israel, right? He's talking about everybody, mankind. So that's one of the reasons that that word for God is used. This would invoke the thought that God is universal. This task was given by God not as a chance occurrence. Do you see the difference? He makes it very clear, I have received this task and it came from God. It didn't just coincidentally happen in my life. Okay? Who did God give the task to? The sons of men, which would be what? What's another phrase that we would understand that in our culture? Humankind. Everybody. Right? How else is this task described? It's an affliction, that mankind is afflicted with this, right? So it wouldn't just be Solomon, right? Sometimes I share things in here and I tell you ladies, this conviction is to be shared with you all. Okay, that's what this is like. He's saying this is affliction, but for mankind, okay? So when men try to understand all the things that occur on earth, it is not a journey that is laden with joyous contemplations. Instead, it is with affliction and a grievous outcome to ponder. Have you experienced that when you've tried to contemplate big, deep things? Right? This is, again, something that we can universally understand. As men, we have dealt with this. Right? If we read the writings of others, we find out, wow, this has been around for a while in different cultures, right? And throughout time. All right. So what about it is something that people ponder that we would put in the terms of affliction or grievous? How about, why do bad things happen? Right? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to innocent people? Why do evil men prevail? Why is evil ever rewarded? Why is life not a sum game of good rewarded and bad punished? Are these thoughts that you've ever had about anything you've ever thought about or been told about? Kind of daily now. Exactly. All right? Those are heavy things to ponder. Right? They don't leave you going, oh, goody, I'm filled with joy right now. Right? It kind of takes your breath away sometimes. Daily right now. So the question is, how many learned men of history testify to this truth? And I can tell you a lot, and we just shared the fact that in this room it happens a lot. Okay? How many men have driven themselves insane in the pursuit of gaining a knowledge to explain the intricacies of life? Right? Philosophers drive themselves into literal madness. I Googled a list of philosophers just to figure out who we think philosophers are. And just to have a list of, well, how did that end for them? And as I read the list, I cannot tell you how many times it ended with, took their own life, took their own life, took their own life, went mad, took their own life, made a pact to take their life with somebody else. They couldn't deal with the open, gaping hole of emptiness that they felt when they tried to find the meaning of life in the things under the sun. Okay? There are wise teachings that are out there, like even in the scriptures, we have the Proverbs. Well, if you read the Proverbs overall, now we haven't done that as a study, but I would say they seem to demonstrate a truth that doing right will equal reward and doing evil will be judged. Right? When you read them, isn't that often what you see there? Well, that's good in theory, and that's true at times, but is it always true? No. The book of Job challenges this thought on its face value, right? It is this narrative that was an ultimate turnaround for Job in the end, though. Right? If you study it, you do all these things, these bad things happened, and trying to figure out why. But at the end, there's this happy little ending. So if you're using that book, it would seem like, oh, see, eventually in the end, it does happen under the sun to be okay. All right? Why is this not only the truth, or not always the truth? Because we know plenty of people who have done right and proper things in life, yet it does not seem that they were rewarded for those things. We know those kind of people in our own lives, right? So that's what we're looking at in Ecclesiastes. That is the ultimate thing that brought Solomon to this point in his life to try to figure this question out. Because it's not making sense. And he's a man with ultimate wisdom and knowledge and discernment, and yet he cannot figure it out. So in Ecclesiastes verse 14, what does Solomon declare he has done in pursuit of researching this truth? I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun. So Solomon has observed all the works of men. What would the works of man done under the sun be? I mean, did he see every housewife dust everything in her house at some point in time? I doubt that's what he's talking about. He didn't see me either. There you go, meddling, you're right. Hey, I told you earlier, conviction for us all. I would say he has seen a lot, which we're going to get into. But if you say I've seen all the things, he's probably referring to looking at the accumulated knowledge of that time and looking at what man has tried that isn't answering this question. Okay? So Solomon said this journey was taken to examine all things through his wisdom, what was known by man. He keeps taking us back to the earth, to the temporal, to men, right? Because he's ultimately going to tell us that's not where it's found, right? But he's walking through the process of establishing why these things are true. All right. Just as a reminder, we're talking about Solomon through scriptures in 1 Kings 3:12. It says, behold, I have done according to your words. This is God talking. I have given you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has been no one like you before you, nor shall one like you arise after you. That's important. That's amazingly important, and I think it's missed by many of these folks that I'm reading the commentaries on. I'm like, wait, don't forget, this was God-given, and in scriptures, nobody before and nobody after. We can't even comprehend what this man had as a gift from God. So Solomon has superior wisdom and discernment beyond any man before or since, and it was God-given. But with that, don't you think it also drove him a little on the crazy side? Right? If these philosophers were doing all the things, don't you think that's what he battled internally in his mind all the time, trying to figure out? Remember, there was not a kingdom that did not recognize the wisdom of Solomon. Each kingdom of this time would have compared their accumulated knowledge with that displayed by Solomon. And I'm not just guessing about that. Scriptures give us that. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29 through 34, we read, now God gave Solomon wisdom and very great discernment and breadth of mind, like the sand that is on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east, all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Kolhal, Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was known in all the surrounding nations. Let that sink in. All the wisdom that had been accumulated by all the other cultures paled in comparison to the wisdom this man brought. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. That just touches on the wisdom of this man. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that grows on the wall. He spoke also of animals and birds and creeping things and fish. Men came from all peoples to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. There's no exaggeration to the intellect of this man and the wisdom, okay? And these are the things that he is contending with to find answers for. So back in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 14, with all the wisdom and discernment given by God to Solomon, what is his conclusion of the work to be? All is vanity, striving after the wind. A man's wisdom is meaningless in determining the meaning of life, and the pursuit to that end is like chasing the wind. Just like all those philosophers experienced, right? Just getting you down again. I'm kind of feeling down like I want to, right? Do you feel the weightiness of this? Verse 15, what observation does Solomon make next? That's an interesting one. What is crooked can't be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. All right, so the things that Solomon saw as crooked could not be made straight. So philosophy and education in the world does not restore the evil nature of man. Crooked, what is crooked? Right? Things that are crooked. How many times do you find something, you see that it's broken, you see a person that's broken, you see a thing that's broken, you see a system that's broken, and you are not ever going to be able to fix it? All the time. There you go. Right? And the more you see, the more it's too broken to deal with. So sometimes we have to shut down to survive. I can't hear any more bad. I can't deal with any more of the negative that I can't fix because it overwhelms my heart. That's what he's experiencing. All the things out there that are crooked that he can't make straight. What was determined to be lacking in man's wisdom could not even be calculated. It was so great a list of things that were broken. He couldn't even make a full list of it. It kept coming at him and kept coming at him and kept coming at him. There was so much Solomon determined missing in man's understanding, it was beyond measure. Verse 16. What self-awareness did Solomon admit to? Verse 16. He says, I myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my mind has observed the wealth and wisdom and knowledge. So he's back to, this is what I bring to this. I've made this statement of crookedness that can't be made straight, things that can't be calculated. And now he's going to go back to, and I'm in a position to see these things. I know what I'm talking about. So Solomon had to admit to himself that there was no one who had accumulated as much wisdom as he had to make reference from. There was nowhere else to turn to increase the knowledge that he had access to. There was nowhere else to turn. In verse 17, what comparison to wisdom did Solomon look at? He says, I set my mind to know wisdom and to know, my translation says, madness and folly. So it would appear to me that madness and folly were in contrast to wisdom. Right? Or that in his search for an answer in wisdom, he even tried to learn more about madness and folly. Interesting, the Septuagint translates those words, parables and science. Found that an interesting little tidbit. It may be Solomon wants to learn of madness and folly to avoid them. Right? Does Solomon turn from seeking wisdom from only wise men, but maybe also to achieve wisdom by learning what to avoid from madness and folly? For me, the context would make sense. If he's trying to talk about the completeness of where he has gone to seek information, he's saying, hey, I went to the wise of the wise, and I went to the fools in madness. I left no stone unturned in my seeking for answers. Okay? The more we strive for an outcome in one direction does not lead to the answer for us, and we continue in that direction, it's often considered what? Insanity, right? Don't you remember, you've heard the quote that says the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over again and expect a different result? Okay? I don't know if that was actually Einstein or not. It makes so much sense. I don't think it can be attributed to one person. I think many of us has come to that conclusion. Okay? Verse 17. What did this comparison result in for Solomon? I realized this was striving after the wind. Solomon did not find the answer he was looking for. Right? Verse 18, the comparison of wisdom to extreme folly did not help Solomon find the answer he was seeking. Why? Because in much wisdom is much grief. Increasing knowledge results in pain. What did more wisdom for Solomon bring? Much grief. What did increasing knowledge for Solomon bring? Increasing pain. In fact, more wisdom only brought more grief. The more Solomon was aware of the injustices, the inequalities, the oppression, the cruelty, and the suffering in men's life with no clear answers as to why it exists or how to fix them, only increased Solomon's pain. Does that make sense? That makes logical sense, doesn't it? Keep in mind the reason for Solomon to seek the wisdom and the knowledge was to understand all that had been done under the sun that was given back in verse 13. And all of that went back to verse 3, right? Chapter 1, verse 3 said, what advantage does man have in all his work which is under the sun? So again, we're back to the question. The question is, what advantage does man have in all his work? What is the sum advantage in what man accomplishes here on earth? All men can accomplish in the flesh, in his temporal being, gives no advantage. When things are less than advantage or equal or fair, man can't put it right. That which is crooked, right? Or explained all that is missing in understanding, and therefore, in that regard, wisdom is meaningless in this ultimate pursuit. Wisdom is a good thing. Solomon's not saying wisdom in itself is bad, but it did nothing in the measurement of finding advantage in life under the sun. Okay? Does that make sense? So ultimately now we've gone through the cycles as his example of not finding the answer that he's looking for. And now he tells us, oh yeah, and by the way, wisdom is meaningless in finding the answer as well. So that's his second form of justification, to demonstrate that it's meaningless. Okay? So now we're going to go into chapter 2. In case you haven't had enough joy already, we're going to move to chapter 2. Okay? And we're going to read in chapter 2, starting in verse 1, and I'll read all the way through verse 11. And I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explore with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had home-born slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my pleasure. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Notice how he always comes back to that same conclusion. All right, let's go back to verse 1. Again, since we have such lightheartedness to go through here, right? Verse 1, seeking more wisdom did not bring Solomon to answer his question. So how does Solomon say he continues his journey to discover what advantage man has in all his works? He said what? Well, he starts with this interesting quote. He has a conversation with himself. What does he say? I just said to myself, right? That's me. I say to myself a lot. Sometimes in the car while I'm driving, I say a lot to myself. My son one time says to me, because I do talk to other drivers, and he said, Mom, they can't hear you. Yeah, I know. That's okay. It's not inside here. I got it out. That's okay. What did Solomon tell himself? I'm going to test you, myself, right? So enjoy yourself. He says, you know what? I'm going to use this as a test. I'm going to take off any of the shackles, right? I am just going to go for it. I'm just going to experience everything there is to experience, and I'm going to give myself license to do it. What answer does it bring Solomon to? Right away, he tells us what? It too was futility. So now he's going to walk us on a journey to unpack exactly what verse 1 means. Okay? He's going to give us more insight into what he's talking about. So in verse 2, what did Solomon say he tried next? I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Again, there's a lot of comparison contrast I think we can miss, and I'm not saying I see it all, but here's what I think we see in verse 2. From the lighthearted, simple joy of laughter, right? That's a form of joy. We usually kind of see it as on the light side when someone can make you laugh, right? To the most extreme pursuits of pleasure, right? From the least to the greatest, he tried them all. And what is the rhetorical question he ends with? What does it accomplish? Right? So the implied answer is that it did not accomplish the goal of finding the answer. In verse 3, next, what does Solomon try? So he explored with his mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there was in the sons of men. All right, so let's unpack that. So Solomon decided to logically experiment with affecting his body with wine. That's what he's clearly said here. He clarifies what limitation? While my mind was guiding me wisely. What is the implication? He did not get drunk. Drinking for the physical effect, but stopping before the mind was not in control. He wants to make that clear, right? Can wine do things to enhance the experiences of the body, of pleasure? That food can taste better, right? Physical touch can be different. He did all of the things to enhance, but he says never to the point that my mind lost control. What else did Solomon explore? How to take hold of folly, all right? So participating in joys, but allowing himself to participate without those things taking control of reason, right? In moderation, he engaged in everything. That's what he's communicating here. What was the purpose of these experiments? Until I could see what good there is in the sons of men to do under heaven for the few years they have in their lives. Do we try to pack a whole lot into our lives while we're here? Right? I've only got so long. I need to get this done. Right? Where's our bucket list? Right? Isn't the bucket list a figure of speech of saying there's so many things I want to get done while I'm in this life? Okay? Verse 4, what focus of striving to find an answer does Solomon share next? He starts with, I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards. We're going to spend a little time here, okay? Solomon does not list all the works he set out to accomplish, but we have a glimpse of this list of projects. So I am going to take us there, again, to understand who this person is and what we know in scriptures about him so that we can trust these words ultimately, okay? In 1 Kings chapter 9, I'm going to read verses 15 through 19. Now this is the account of the forced labor which King Solomon levied to build the house of the Lord, his own house, the Millo, the wall of Jerusalem, Hazar, Megiddo, and Gezer. For Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer and burned it with fire and killed the Canaanites who lived there in the city and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. We don't really consider that quite a gift these days, but apparently that was a big-time gift back then. Okay? Here's a city, and I've cleaned out all the people for you. Ta-da! So Solomon rebuilt Gezer and the lower Bethhoron, or Beth-horon, and Baloth and Tamar in the wilderness in the land of Judah. But the list doesn't stop there. And all the storage cities which Solomon had, even the cities of his chariots and the cities for his horsemen, and all that it pleased Solomon to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land under his rule. So the details of the project of Solomon building a house for the name of the Lord are given in 1 Kings, starting in chapter 5, verse 5, ending in chapter 6, verse 38. Guess what? I'm not going to read all of that. You can do that for some study on your own if you want to learn a little bit more about what that looked like, because it is pretty amazing, all that got accomplished in building this temple. Okay? I will read the beginning and the end of those verses that I put in the notes if you want to go do some study. So, 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 5, behold, I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spoke to David my father, saying, your son whom I will set on your throne, in your place, he will build the house for my name. Then there's all the stuff that happens, all the details. And then in chapter 6, verse 38, in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished throughout all its parts and according to all its plans. So he was 7 years in building it. He spent 7 years building the temple. This was an amazing accomplishment. The emphasis of the projects that Solomon was listing were the things he did for himself. This is talking about back in Ecclesiastes when he listed. The only thing he put there generically was, my works were enlarged. I know you think he listed this particular project. You notice that in Ecclesiastes, we find the end of many of those verses, for myself, for myself, for myself, right? Was the temple of God built for Solomon's self? Absolutely not. He was still in charge. He still built, but it wasn't for him. Okay? So I think that's why he doesn't list that, and there's this generic works were enlarged. Okay? Back to Ecclesiastes then, chapter 2, verse 4. What else did Solomon do? I built houses for myself. So now we're on to building the house for himself. In 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 1, we read, now Solomon was building his own house 13 years. That's a big house. And he finished all his houses. So he built more than one house. Right? He probably Riviera, there's the beach, there's the mountain, there's the, right? He had all kinds of houses. Of course, with all the wives and concubines, you'd need a whole lot of houses, right? Chapter 7, verse 8, it says, his house where he was to live, the outer court, inward from the hall, was the same workmanship. He also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom Solomon had married. So there's another example. It's a house for her, but it's still his house, right? He's making multiple houses. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 4, how did this verse finish? Vineyards for myself. After all, what's a great estate without your own vineyard? And in case any of you haven't done that kind of agriculture, does a vineyard pop up the first year you plant it? No, it takes a lot to plan to do a vineyard. The right land, it's got to be laid out right. The vines have to have time. This is a long-term project. That's the emphasis. Long term. It took him a while to build all these houses and to do all the vineyards that went with them. Of course, it would make sense that you'd have to have your own vineyard if you're going to have the greatest wine. So he had to take care of both of those things. Verses 5 and 6. What other impressive projects does Solomon recount? Got gardens and parks, and he planted them with all kinds of fruit trees. Again, does that happen in the first year you plant it? Long-term projects that he participated in. Oh, and then to top it off, he made ponds of water for himself, right? One of them that was to irrigate a forest of growing trees. That's a big project, ladies. That's a humongous project. All of these things take great planning and time. They take great knowledge in a multitude of areas. Name some of them. What are some of the areas that you would need to know to do just this list we've been given? Architecture, agriculture, forestry, horticulture, biology, geology. Huge list of things. And he says, I did it. He didn't just command it to be done. Now, I doubt he laid there and did brick by brick, obviously, right? But it was here, and he planned it, and he made it happen. That's what Solomon was participating in. In verse 7, what did Solomon own? He says, I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves, and I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me. We keep hearing that, right? He already knows he's got more going for him than anybody else that preceded him. We're going back to 1 Kings again because I want to give you the details because Scripture does give us a lot of this detail in 1 Kings. Chapter 9, starting verse 20, and I'll go through 23. As for all the people who were left of the Ammonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not of the sons of Israel, their descendants who were left after them in the land, whom the sons of Israel were able to destroy utterly from them, Solomon levied forced laborers, even to this day. But Solomon did not make slaves of the sons of Israel, for they were men of war, his servants, his princes, his captains, his chariot commanders, and his horsemen. These were the chief officers who were over Solomon's work, 550, who ruled over the people doing the work. So do you see where some of these came from? Some slaves you buy outright, some slaves you inherit. He took these people and he did forced labor with these people. It's very clear that he did not do that if they were Jews, but the Jews still served him. You notice that he put in the word there, men of war, his servants, his princes, because he's king, everybody serves him. Verse 8, how did Solomon pay for all this work to be done and accumulation of things? I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasures from kings and provinces. Again, details, right? 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 26 through 29 says, King Solomon also built a fleet of ships in Ezer-Geber, which is near Elath, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent his servants with the fleet, sailors who knew the sea, along with the servants of Solomon. They went to Ophir and took 420 talents of gold from there and brought it to King Solomon. If I had more time, I would have spent a little time on letting you know exactly what 420 talents of gold would be in today's market, but I didn't do that. I'm going to say a lot. That's all that matters, is it's more than we can possibly imagine, and it was enough to afford to do all the things that we hear that he did. That's a lot. Basically, ladies, money was no obstacle for him. He didn't have a housing budget. Okay? Whatever he wanted, he did it. He made it the grandest it could possibly be. There was no budget concern. In verse 8, how does this is back in Ecclesiastes, how does this verse end? I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. So every form of entertainment and physical pleasure was obtained by Solomon. Do you remember last time that we looked in 1 Kings? How many concubines do we know that he had? 300. We got that in 1 Kings 11:3. It said he had 700 wives and princesses and 300 concubines. And his wives turned his heart away. What is the difference between a wife and a concubine? Any experts here? Me too.
Wouldn't a wife inherit or be part of whatever he has, where a concubine is just who he slept with for the night?
We probably put concubine in too small a role than what the term was used in this day for. So wives would usually bring a dowry to the relationship, whereas a concubine, she doesn't bring anything. Okay? In cultures that permitted ownership of slaves, the concubine would be a slave. That would be another declarative thing we are not familiar with, since we don't have that in our culture. There was no remarriage permitted for either woman, nor a return to her parental home. Both are taken care of for life. Right, so we want to have this, there's the wives, and now they had differences in authority. A wife would consider to be higher than a concubine, but when you're in a group of 700 wives, I don't know what the hierarchy is there, right? I found it interesting. We had a friend that came back from Africa that did mission work there for, 7 or 8 years, and he said one of the things that he dealt with the men there, because in that culture that they were preaching the gospel in, obviously one of the difficult things was when somebody came to know the Lord and realized, I'm only supposed to have one of these? Now what do I do, right? And they say, no, if you are married, then you honor that wife, you take care of that wife. And in their minds, they already were doing that. So in their culture, guess what? They see as superior to their culture than our culture. When they marry a wife, they take care of that wife for life. They don't set the wife aside. And what do they see in our culture? Divorce. Setting the wife aside. They're like, how can you do that? I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Here, I wanted to look down on the multiple wife thing, and then I went, well, they took care of their wives. So again, we have different, ideas that pop in our mind when we hear these things. So these are mentioned here because what did he just say? He's talking about the slaves that he purchased. So in that subcategory would be the concubines. He owned them. He purchased them. They didn't come with anything, no dowry of their own. But they're still in the harem, if you call it that, right? They're still taken care of. They would still have children, right? They just don't have some of the authority that a wife would have in that regard. But they didn't get to leave. They didn't get to go marry somebody else. They didn't get to go home to be with the family in northern, wherever they came from, right? I had my night, and now I'm gone. Well, we don't know how often they got to be with them. Hard for our minds to imagine, ladies, and we're not going to spend a lot of time there, but 700 wives and 300 concubines are a lot of people to keep happy. I don't know that a man with wisdom should truly do that, but that's just my judgment, sorry. Just my limited ability of understanding, that's all I can say. Okay, verse 9. How does Solomon sum up all he had achieved? He says, then I became great, and I increased more than all that preceded. Interesting end note. What does he say? My wisdom also stood by me. I'm just going to go to the conclusion. So Solomon acknowledges all these vast accomplishments and that his wisdom never left him. It was a gift that kept producing all these outcomes. We might call it the gift that kept on giving. Right? My wisdom stayed there with me through it all. This wisdom that God gave me never left in the midst of all of these experiences that I went through. Okay?
But God had already told him he would give him that.
Absolutely.
He didn't-
Absolutely.
Solomon kept saying, I. It wasn't I, it was God who gave it to him.
But we can see the focus of Solomon's heart totally coming forward. I was going to figure this out. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to do this. My houses, my concubines, my slaves, my. The heart of man is evil, right? And we all suffer from that horrible disease, and we are so self-focused. That's part of our flesh nature that we have to fight all the time. It doesn't go away. I don't care whether you're 2 or 102. It's always the flesh nature we need to fight. Solomon was no different. He just didn't have any restrictions. Right? I don't get to buy everything because I have a budget. Right? He didn't have that. Verse 10, what did Solomon allow to direct his pursuits? He says, all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. What goal directed Solomon's quests? He says, I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. Just in case somebody was sitting back thinking, what he never tried was whatever. Right? He's like, no, there is nothing you can think of in the world of pleasure that I haven't tried out. What was the result of these pursuits? He says, for my heart was pleased of all my labor, and this was my reward. So Solomon declares this was his reward. His heart was pleased. That was it. There was nothing that brought the answer he was looking for. He's not saying that pleasure had no joy or that pleasure had no impact. That's not what he's saying. He's letting us know, no, it was there, and I enjoyed it for what it was supposed to be for, and it filled my heart with great delight and pleasure. But that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for an answer to life. And this pursuit did not answer that question. Verse 11, what is the summation for Solomon of these achievements? He says, thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind. There was no profit under the sun. We're back to his conclusion again. He doesn't want us to forget what the whole point is that he's seeking. All wealth and activities it afforded were vanity, futile, and meaningless. They were like striving after the wind, something one can never catch. There is no end game with an ultimate satisfaction. There is no profit or advantage or some game under the sun. These activities were only squandered time in the measurement of life lived out on the earth. So how would you sum up those verses in chapter 2, 1 through 11. What did he ultimately find was meaningless?
Everything he had, everything he did.
Pursuits to make yourself happy, pleasure.
Things of pleasure might be one thing, but what was his emphasis? How did he get to practice those pleasures?
With his wisdom.
There was self-indulgence. Well, there was some wisdom. Does it just take wisdom for me to build a house in a vineyard? Right there. He had no budget. No budget is meaningless. I'm going to remember that when I have my budget. There's a reason you have a budget. The meaninglessness of wealth. A bottomless pit doesn't give you the answers to life. Right? So he had addressed at the end of chapter 1 that wisdom was meaningless in this pursuit. Now, the beginning of chapter 2, we find out wealth is meaningless in this pursuit. That's what I want to keep drawing you back to. We're back to the theme of what is the meaning of life on this earth, and these are the things he's expressing to the people reading. I tried this, it didn't give me the answer. I tried this, it didn't give me the answer. You can see this happening. You can see the cycles. You can see all that. You may not have all the money in the world, but let me tell you what it's like to be the man that had all the money in the world and could do anything I wanted, and at the end of it, I still didn't have that answer. That's not where it's going to be found. Yes?
He didn't have the answer to life, but he seemed to have that answer to happiness.
He says, I found pleasure, but that doesn't mean he equated that to happiness overall. Now, if Ecclesiastes was about how to find happiness, we could end right here, because he found that part, the pleasure of life, the things that can bring us measurement in our temporal lives, in our flesh. Every generation turns to that. Every generation, and that's his whole point. Generation comes, that's what he did last week in chapter 1. They come and they go. They get knowledge, and then it gets lost, and then they have to learn it again. And we do that in our own lives. If I'd learned what my mother taught me, I wouldn't have had to learn that lesson. I had a pretty smart daughter. She learned a lot of lessons that I went through, and she didn't have to learn them. She was a very smart girl very early in life. But in general, we have to learn it over and over and over and over and over. So again, Ecclesiastes is at the end of Solomon's life, him looking back at the life that he's led, ultimately never finding the answer for men on this earth in their flesh to the reason for life. The sum game, the advantage, the reason for it all. It wasn't found here. He's now sharing with others who are willing to ride along with him in the journey by reading what he is sharing, that is not going to be how you find the answer of the advantage of your life. It'll come as we get further down the road. But right now, we're in the midst of him laying out all those things that we should think about that don't give us the answer. Let me tell you all the things that don't give you the answer. Fill in the blank to what you're looking for. Let's just pick a silly one. How about weight loss? I can give you all the things that don't give you the answer to that. This doesn't work ultimately, and this, and this, and this, and this, right? Those things just do not. And here's all the reasons those things don't give you what you want. What are you waiting for me to share? Here's the one that works, ladies. This is the secret right here, that little one.
Yes.
Right? That's the secret. That's what Solomon's writing about life. Let me tell you all the things that don't work and why they didn't work. That's not where you're going to go seeking the answer. But he's going to have a secret. He's going to share with us later. But I want you guys to think on this, because as we start to unpack a lot of what's left in Ecclesiastes, we're going to hear a lot of bad things that Solomon discovered is in the heart of man. It just drew that out of him even more, the frustration of not having the right answers. And we're in a culture right now that's very much like what we're going to see coming in Ecclesiastes. Doesn't make sense. I can't believe what I just saw with my eyes, that humans would do that to one another in our world. It makes no sense. Well, join the club. It made no sense to Solomon. We're not the first to see this kind of activity. Evil men are evil men, whether they live on this soil or another soil or another time period in life. But it should draw us to the fact there is an answer ultimately for us, right? We have Jesus. We have a different outcome to look forward to. That doesn't mean that we won't struggle with these things as we see them in the here and now. We won't be saddened by them. Our wisdom won't kick in and go, does not compute, makes no sense, right? But we stop ourselves when that starts to be where we go and go, whoa, wait a minute. I gotta focus my eyes back on Jesus. I gotta spend my time focusing on that, because all of this, I can't change that. I can change my world or the things that God puts me in my world to deal with that might be a subset of that, right? That's where I got to go. Because ultimately, I know there's an answer. I know that something under the sun that was different, that's not temporal but eternal. Okay, so there's a reason we're studying this pessimistic literature, right? We live in some very pessimistic times right now, and our focus is there is an answer. And Solomon's going to get there, but I'm helping you walk through the journey that this man of incredible wisdom walked through. Think about that. Have you ever known one person that everybody wanted to have an audience with because they knew so much about everything? He knew more than every sage of the day, not just living, but past, who had saved everything in the libraries of the world at that time. He surpassed in every way all of that. And I only emphasize that because sometimes we get caught, if I just knew a little more, this would make a little more sense. Nope, it's not going to make any more sense. There's no logic to explain what evil man does here under the sun on this earth. But you, ladies, you do know an answer. You know the ultimate answer for anybody as wise as they think they are, or filled with folly, or seeking after pleasure. There's only one answer that's eternal answer, and that's Jesus. You be the light in the dark world around you. I shared this last week with a smaller group, but not with the whole group. I love this picture. When I homeschooled one year, the teacher notes that were given as an encouragement, you can do this another year. And we were going to be studying the 1900s with World War I and World War II and the Holocaust, and like war and darkness and evil just personified. And you're like, oh, yay, homeschool. Right? I get to teach them all the dark stuff. But she did this beautiful picture, and she said, when you go to the jewelry store, maybe to buy a diamond, something pretty and sparkly, what does the jeweler do? Oh, he brings out the blackest velvet he can find, and then he lays that diamond out there. Now, does the diamond shine on its own? It's got no light of its own. But he puts a light on it, and then the purity, the colors of that diamond just shine. You are the diamond. He is the light. Think about that. His light is what shines through you. But when do you shine the brightest? In the darkest of the dark. I have a feeling we're going to get a chance to be quite a few diamonds. Okay? And that's okay. That's okay. I don't mean to get all heavy and dark on you, but you guys have the answer in here, and you can share that answer with others.